Yes, Ms Margoose, if you please continue.
And then can I look at paragraph 58, please? You've said, I am asked how I felt in general about how Police Scotland, the PERC and COPFS dealt with the investigation and how they treated me. I just remember that they were really deliberate in trying to give a really bad picture of who Sheik was, what had happened, and there were so many lies told that had come from the police. They were really going to town on Sheik's character and even myself. There were stories in the media about me that weren't true. I felt like they kind of went after us to try and paint a picture that would help them. Could you explain what you meant by that?
In regards to Sheik, I just remember that they were describing him out to be having things like excited delirium, being like a zombie, being really, really big. I remember how they had, the first thing that had come out was that Sheik had a knife. And I remember when we were first told it was that he had a knife and he had tried to go towards him with the knife. And then it wasn't until later on that we found out that when the police approached him, he actually didn't have the knife. He'd had his hands up, but that was kind of already put out to the public that he'd had a knife when the police came into contact with him. So I just remember a lot of the stories really concentrating on the drugs and the excited delirium and having superhuman strength and being a zombie and being the size of a house. And I just felt like it was unfair.
You've talked about all three organisations, the police, PERC and the Crown Office. And you've said at the end, I felt like they kind of went after us to try and paint a picture that would help them. Are you saying that in relation to all three of the organisations?
I think I kind of just put them under one big umbrella. I don't trust any of them, so I think I just put them all in one.
From your perspective, having lived through this experience, why do you see that these organisations tried to blame Sheku and vilify him?
I feel like they made it out that what happened to Sheik was his own fault. I feel like they haven't taken any blame as to what happened. We've never been apologised to. They've never admitted any mistakes or wrongdoings. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
No, it's perfectly all right. Let's look at another paragraph, number 59, please. And you say here, you were asked how I thought the stories were in the media. It was the police, things came out that now we know are not true about him having a knife, that he'd gone towards the police with the knife, and now we know that that wasn't true, that he'd chased, kicked and stamped on Nicole Short. There's just no space for that to happen, that he was a massive 6-foot-odd man, built like a house when he wasn't. He was 5'10" and weighed 12.5 stone. Is that what effectively you're trying to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's look at paragraph 61, please. You've said here, I feel like they were trying to be stereotypical of a big scary black man. I can't understand why they think he's so large. I don't understand their terminology in describing Sheik because it is far from the truth. In my opinion, that image was portrayed to the public to excuse what the police had done. And you put this in quotation marks. Because he was so huge, they couldn't control him. He was massive, and that's why it took 6 officers to restrain him. Why is that in quotation marks?
I'm not sure. It must be something that I'd said when I was given my statement.
Is it a direct quote from
Yeah,
somebody, or is
I
it
would have said that.
you said it
Yeah.
rather than a direct quote from someone else?
No, this is what I had said to answer a question. That was my opinion of.
Right, thank you. And you've said there, I'm asked whether I think there was racism in the portrayal of Sheku. I think so. They did describe him as black, and he is black, but it's almost the stereotypes that they were using, that he was incredibly large when he wasn't incredibly large. To me, I just feel like they are met with so many different types of people every single day. They deal with people who are under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and they're able to arrest them fine. Why was it such a challenge for Sheik?
Mm-hmm.
So I think your perception is that the portrayal
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
seem different for Sheik.
I just don't understand why they think that he is so huge. I mean, he had a muscular build, but he wasn't massive. You know, he was only a little bit taller than me. So when I looked at him, I thought, oh, you're muscly, you've got a good body, but I didn't think you're massive. Like, so to me, it's just confusing to me why do they think that he's so massive? And of course, because some of the officers that were there were much larger than Sheik, so I really just don't understand why they think that he is so huge.
From your own personal
Uh-huh.
perspective, if your partner had been a white man,
Mm-hmm.
is it your view that the comments would have been different in the press?
Yeah, but I think that they would have treated Sheik completely differently. Sheik used to always say to me that about racism and the police, and before this happened, I was very naive to everything, and he had said, you know, as a black man, when you are up against the police, it doesn't matter if you have done right or if you have done wrong. The only way you're getting out from a confrontation with the police is if you run. There is no way out as a black man when you're coming up against the police. And I remember having the conversation with him and saying, you know, this isn't true. You know, we're not in America. And kind of having that prejudice against kind of thinking, you know, it's not fair for me to say that, like, that's how he felt as a black man. And I just don't understand. I don't understand why they think he's so big. And, you know, we've heard how they do come across people who are on drugs. They do come across people who have knives. They managed to arrest them all right. You know, they managed to get the restraints on him. There's vans there. Why are you not just restraining him and putting him in the van? Why are you on top of him to the point where you then see that he's unconscious? I don't understand. This is just...
Do you still have a lot of unanswered questions
Yeah,
in your mind?
Yeah, I just don't understand. You've managed to restrain him, put him in the van. If he's lashing about in the van, he's only hurting himself. I don't understand why somebody's lying on his chest, his shoulders, jumping on his legs. Why is that happening? To me, this is what I don't understand, what makes me angry, why there's no criminal charges, because I haven't trained in the police, but I wouldn't imagine that was proportionate or the right way of arresting somebody.
You'll realise the chair's got all of these questions
Yeah,
to
sorry.
answer. He's got a big job ahead.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, when was the first moment that you realised that race might be an issue in the circuit? You'll have heard some of the evidence that
Yeah.
people have said race was never an issue, and then you'll have heard other evidence where people say they think it
Yeah.
was something they were thinking about. When did you become aware that race might be an issue?
I really didn't think about it straight away. I think that's maybe naive on my behalf again, because I'd like to think that we lived in a world where racism wasn't a thing. And I didn't want to think of the idea that racism was maybe involved in this. But I think more the way they were describing him, and, you know, like saying how big he was, what a build he had. To me, it just portrayed him in a really bad way, and not true.
Can I move on and ask you some questions about your involvement with the Crown Office, with the Lord Advocate? Could we look at paragraph 53 first of all? Now, we've heard evidence that in the time since Sheku died, that there's been 2 Lord Advocates that have been engaging with the family.
Yeah.
Frank Mulholland and James Wolfe. And you comment in paragraph 53 about having a meeting or meetings with the Lord Advocate. And you say that I was very angry because they would always talk about the restraint being proportionate, or the right amount of violence and the right amount of restraint was used. I remember being so angry thinking, but it's not normal. What happened wasn't normal protocol. Which Lord Advocate are you talking about when you describe this meeting here?
This one, I think it was, trying to remember his name, Frank Mulholland.
Right. And also in paragraph 53, you talk about, what do you see? There's a section of this paragraph which says, I'm asked if a comment was made by the Lord Advocate himself. It was made by the Lord Advocate, and I think it was something like he brought it on himself, or he has done this to himself. And you'll see that on the next page of the statement. So we're on page 19 at the moment. If we move on to page 20, you'll see this there in quotation marks. He'd done it himself, or he brought it on himself. And it was a comment made by the Lord Advocate. You'll see that again repeated. And that was that Frank Mulholland, or was it James Wolfe?
I couldn't remember when I was doing my statement who that was, but on reflection I think that was James Wolfe, if that's his name. And I think it was him, because I then never went to any meeting afterwards after that.
Why was that?
Because I got so angry, like all these meetings with the Lord Advocate, I would be very angry, I'd be very emotional, and when I came away from them, my mental health wasn't good. But I remember in particular that meeting, and I think it was the newer Lord Advocate, and he had said something like he's done it to himself. If he was responding to the arrest, he wouldn't have sustained these injuries, or I'm sure he used words like if he wasn't flailing around or fighting against it, then this wouldn't have happened. And I remember thinking, are you kidding me on? There's like 9 officers or 6 officers on top of him. How do you want him to react? And I just remember thinking, you're not having any more of my time if that's your opinion, and I certainly don't think that you're going to be doing anything in our best interest to help us.
Looking back now at the engagement you had with the 2 Lord Advocates, can you think of anything that could have been done to help improve those meetings or to make them better from your perspective?
Probably not. You know, I think the only thing, out of everything that happened, the only thing that would make me feel any kind of sort of a little bit better would be if I felt like justice had been done and that there was criminal charges, but I think I was never very optimistic about it. And then when they would go on and say it's complex, and I just remember thinking, I don't know why I'm putting myself through this, because to me there's nothing complex about it, and I would just be very angry and very frustrated about it, so I took myself away from that situation.
Thank you. Finally, I'd like to ask you...
Just before you leave the question of the Lord Advocate, could you have a look at paragraph 54, if you just scroll down a little bit. You say there in the second sentence, I only attended meetings with Frank Mulholland. I did not have any interactions with James Wolfe. Mm-hmm. Now, I think you just to clarify,
Yeah.
I think you did have you've just been describing meetings with, or a meeting at least.
Yeah, I remember
James Wolfe.
when I was doing my original statement, I thought that it was just Frank Mulholland, but then on reflection, I think I did meet the James Wolfe, and it was him who had said that he kind of basically brought it on himself, and then after that I didn't attend anymore.
Thank you.
Thank you. You've mentioned earlier today about your kitchen and knives in the kitchen, and I wondered if the police had ever asked you at any stage if a knife was missing from a set in your kitchen.
I remember Park coming to my mum's with all of with knives and tubing, and asking me to identify them as being our knives. And I remember not being very sure about that at all. And I remember thinking, no, I don't recognise that, I don't know. And they were very, very pushy. Just keep looking at it. It's very difficult to tell in the tubing. And I remember thinking, I don't recognise them. What more do you want me to say? But they were very, very pushy. These did come from your house. And I just remember thinking, but I don't recognise them. I can't say for sure that they are mine. And they said, but they have come from your house. But it's very difficult to recognise them through the tubing. And I just remember thinking, I'm just telling you, I don't recognise them. If you're telling me that they've come from my house, then maybe they have. But at this point, I didn't have any trust for the police at this point. So they probably could have walked me through the house with the knives, and I still wouldn't believe that they'd come from mine.
Was it Perk who asked you about the knives, not the police?
No, it was Park.
It was Perk. Did you ever think, oh, there is a knife missing from knives in the kitchen?
No, I remember when I was giving my statement to the police, I was describing how I had found the kitchen. And when I had gone into the kitchen, our top drawer was open, but it was just cutlery. And I remember them saying, so this would be where you kept your knives. And I said, no, that's not where I keep my knives. We kept our knives in the second drawer down. It was the top drawer that was open. It was the cutlery drawer. And then I said, but that's not where we kept our knives. That's not where we kept our knives. We kept our knives in the second drawer. And I kept repeating it. And at this point, I didn't know anything. So I don't know why I was so adamant on saying that's not where I kept my knives. And then I remember when I got my statement back, and I got to read it over, the police had actually wrote that the drawer that was open was my knife drawer. And then I remember being so confused and so angry because I was so adamant on saying that that wasn't the drawer that was open.
Did you change that statement?
Yes, yeah.
And were you ever at any time asked to identify a knife that was said to have been found at the scene?
No.
Can you just give me a moment, please? Oh, sorry. Thank you. I've got no further questions. Thank you.
Ms Mitchell, do you have any application under Rule 9.2? Certainly.
66 to 68 of the statement.
Sorry, just,
I wonder if we do this in front of the witness or?
no, I think we need to let the witness go back to the room now. Logistically, should I just adjourn very briefly to let that happen? Or, yeah, I'll do that, and then I'll sit to hear your application. Yes, can you come to the table? Yes.
Yes, I would like to ask questions in relation to paragraph 66 to 68 of the statement, and in particular to ask the witness how she felt in relation to, first of all, media being portrayed on social media, that being Twitter, and what the effect of it was to have these things played out in social media, and secondly, when a statement was given, it would appear, by the Police Federation in relation to the press, how in particular she felt about that matter. So that's specifically paragraph 66 and 68. She's given it as a generality, answers to question about how she felt about Sheikh being portrayed in the media, but paragraph 66 is relation in particular to a Callum Steele tweeting and retweeting something, and then a short video of a man slapping another man. And she explains about that. And paragraph 68 is, it would appear, a Federation statement.
Just let me read through these paragraphs, please.
Thank you.
Yes, very well. I shall allow you to ask questions in these paragraphs.
I'm obliged.
Now, again, I probably have to adjourn briefly. You can bring her in. Oh, that's fine. Thank you.
To get the video.
Ms Mitchell has some questions for you. Ms Mitchell.
Just briefly, one or two questions. You've explained to us along the way how you felt when different things happened. Mm-hmm. And really, I just want to ask you about two separate instances that you've talked about, mm-hmm. and ask you to explain to the inquiry how you felt when they happened, what you were feeling. So mm-hmm. that's the sum total of my questions. If I could perhaps have up the inquiry statement of the witness. And if we could go first of all to paragraph 66, please. Now, you were asked when your statement was taken if you had anything else to add with regards to media. And you said, yes, there's something that you wanted to add, and you spoke about social media.
Yeah.
Now, I'll just read out a part and then ask you to comment on it. You say, yes, I wanted to add that Callum Steele had retweeted a GIF about Sheikh mocking him, and then he shared the link to The Sun about me and Zahid having an affair. So this GIF on Twitter, it was something like, and this appears to be a quote, "This is more what happened on the morning and nothing else." And it was a picture, like a short video, of a man slapping another man, and then it had said, "Don't remember, don't forget about this," or something like that. Now, those things have been put in quotations. Are those exact quotations, or are this just what you remember it was?
Yeah, no, that's what I remember it was. And then when I've said, don't remember, don't forget about this, I think I was getting a bit of a stumble, and I think it was more of just, don't forget about this. I didn't mean...
Don't remember, comma, don't forget about it, I see. So you say, in fairness to you, then say, or something like that. So these aren't exact phrases you're quoting.
Yeah, it was something along those lines.
Something along those lines. And you see, it was trying to say that what happened between Sheikh and the police that morning was a slap in the face. And don't forget about this little snippet of absolutely false information about the affair. And the injuries were probably more sustained from the fight that he had with Zahid. I was so disgusted that this had come from Callum Steele. It made me so mad. The audacity of it to come from him, to try and mock what had happened to Sheikh like it was a joke. This is our family member. This isn't a GIF. It isn't funny. We don't deem what happened that morning as a slap in the face. He is dead. How dare you write that? How dare you share that? Now, you've said some powerful words there. Do you remember actually reading that? Do you remember actually reading the GIF when you got it?
I can't remember how it was brought to my attention that this tweet had gone out, but I remember seeing it and just being absolutely disgusted and so angry. I just couldn't believe that he was saying something like that. I was genuinely horrified.
So you were angry, horrified, disgusted.
Yeah.
And how do you feel now?
The same.
You go on in the next paragraph to use a phrase. You say Sheikh was dehumanised. What do you mean by that?
When they were describing him in ways such as a zombie, that's dehumanising somebody. I don't understand why you can't just say he wasn't being responsive. Why do you have to portray an image of him being a zombie? I just don't understand why you would do that. I think it's really wrong, and it's obviously really hurtful. I don't think you should be allowed to call anybody a zombie. Yeah.
And can I move then on to the next paragraph? And that's in relation to a further instance of something that you have said appeared in the media.
Yeah.
And if I might just read out the paragraph and then ask you to comment. Peter Watson gave a statement saying he presented a violent interface with the police. That's a quote from him that was given to a paper. Is that something that you understand was an actual quote then?
Yeah.
Okay. As far as I'm aware, ignoring orders is not violent. What do you mean by that?
Peter Watson had said he presented a violent interface with the police. But to me, just not talking back to somebody and ignoring orders, I wouldn't say that that was violent. I don't know how he presented in a violent interface without acting in a way that I would perceive as being a violent. I wouldn't think that ignoring somebody would be violent.
And you've said then he was met with violence, but to put this into the paper, it makes the public believe he was really violent. And this is what happened because he was violent,
Yeah.
but he wasn't violent.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how that made you feel when you saw him being described in this way?
It makes you feel angry because they were just doing everything they can to kind of justify what they had done. You know, if we say that it was really violent, then that justifies the actions that we done. If we say it was really violent, say it was really massive, that kind of justifies what they had done. And I just feel like they wanted the public to believe that he was massive and that he was violent, and that's why he was treated the way that he was.
And then you've said, it then goes on to say, clearly the fact he now appears to have consumed drugs that affect his behaviour, that makes a great deal of sense in understanding this tragic incident. And that's in quotations as well. You then say, from the very beginning, he was totally blaming the drugs that he had taken and totally deflecting from the restraint.
Yeah.
Can you explain that in more detail?
Whenever Peter Watson was given information to the press, it was always about everything that Sheck had done or not done, and then putting all the focus onto the drugs. It kind of took away from what the police had done, like the actions of the police, and just blaming everything. It was as if to be blaming his death totally on the drugs. And to me, the police are met with people who are under the influence of drinking drugs all the time. So I don't understand how they didn't have the ability to arrest Sheck without him having to die.
And how did it make you feel when you saw that in the press?
Angry, but throughout all of this, everything that's come from the police has left me feeling angry and disgusted and let down.
And does your position still remain the same today?
Yeah. There has been instances where I should have phoned the police and I haven't. I don't trust the police. I now wouldn't think of them as a go-to if I needed, because there has been times where I haven't phoned them.
Thank you.
Oh, if you would allow me one moment. Just touching on that last matter, there is an issue that relates to the post-incident management of this hearing, but hasn't been gone into. I don't know if the court would, the inquiry would wish me to ask the inquiry, if I can ask that further question before asking the witness about it. It might be helpful for the inquiry to hear what it is.
I think the way for me to deal with this, Ms Mitchell, is not to permit questioning at this stage. If in due course a matter arises, then a further statement can be taken or something of that sort.
Well, perhaps it might be advisable in relation to the incident which I think the witness may be alluding to.
Very well. Well, Ms Bell, thank you very much indeed for coming to give evidence.
Thank you.
I'm going to rise now and you'll be free to go. Are there any Rule 9 applications in relation to this witness? No. Now, Ms. Graham, I think the next evidential day will be on the 28th of February, is that right? There are
Put
2
my
weeks in which
schedule in
the inquiry will not be sitting, and then there's evidence the following week. I think that's correct. Yeah. Well, I'll adjourn now.
I've got it.